Let me introduce our guest, Mr. Adetayo Adegbenle. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Power Up Nigeria. He joins us from our Abuja studio. A fine morning to you, Mr. Adegbenle.
Uncle Yori, good morning, sir.
Thank you very much for making the time for us, sir. Now,
it's always a pleasure, sir.
Indeed. Thank you very much. The pleasure is always ours. Let me first of all take your perspective on this, because so many people, I don't think they are from within the industry, said when this news first broke that federal government was considering removing the subsidy on electricity. That, what do you mean subsidy on electricity? Is that being subsidized too? That was the first reaction I got. So let's talk about that first, please. Are you also familiar with that sentiment from ordinary folk?
Absolutely, yes. I've heard a lot of things. In fact, all these developments and, I've had feedbacks, I've had people talking. But you see, like I was in a private conversation yesterday evening and something struck me. A colleague of mine said something and something struck me. And it is also a possibility that we are not doing enough in the power sector to educate Nigerians. There is that possibility. The other possibility, in this instance, is that many Nigerians have not been conscious of what is happening, in the sector.
That's right.
The only thing they are used to or they talk about is, I don't have light. I was talking to somebody this morning. The person said, oh, since they implemented the tariff change, that he has not had up to 6 hours of power supply. And I said, have you tried to find out whether it is a local fault or a bigger fault? And the person kept saying, he doesn't have to. I was saying, okay, he said he didn't tell him. I said, who will have told you if you didn't ask? So there is a very big knowledge gap out there. So when we started talking about tariff, subsidy on electricity tariff, it came as a shock to a lot of people. Like, okay, how is that done? But this is something that the federal government has been carrying for a long time. And it's kept on because it was sustainable. But the last administration under President Buhari, were the ones that came out publicly to say, hey, we cannot continue to pay this tariff. So as at the introduction of the service-based tariff of 2020, September 2020, that was when it was introduced that we are going to have a phased down removal of the subsidy tariff. And by December 2022 tariff review, that's what we had for January, February. In fact, that's what we have until now, basically until thought that this was changed. As at that December 2022 tariff review, a lot of the subsidy has been removed as at then. In fact, I think for people living under Ikeja Band A, for instance, the variance between the actual cost and the tariff that they are being paid, they are allowed to pay, was about maybe 3 or 4 naira. And in places, I think the bigger places were places like Yola, where the difference between the actual tariff and the true cost of electricity and the allowed tariff, which they are allowed to take from them, was about maybe 70-something naira. But as at that December 2022 MITO order, we have started easing off, this subsidy. Unfortunately, we had a change of government, or is it fortunately? But interestingly, maybe interestingly will be better. We had a change of government, and of course, the consequent actions of removing fuel subsidy, removing harmonizing the forex window, led to a lot of blowback from the economy. So naturally, the government vetoed, the next tariff review that was supposed to happen in August, September 2023, and froze tariff reviews. Unfortunately, all the factors that the electricity tariff is dependent on, it didn't stay stagnant. we had things like dollar rates, foreign exchange in dollars. We buy our Gencos, they buy gas in dollars. So it's a bit difficult for them to continue to charge the same rate once the dollar skyrocketed. We had other factors like inflation rates. You know, all those things plays a very, very key role in determining, you know, the electricity tariff. Now, what that means is that because there was a freeze on tariff review, and all these other macroeconomic indices came into play, the cost of electricity kind of went off the, I mean, every other thing. The same way our bread became expensive, the same way our gas for domestic consumption became expensive, the same way fuel became expensive, the cost of electricity also became expensive. Because there was a freeze on that review, Nigerians were able to absorb, I mean, well, don't say Nigerians, but Nigerians were supposed to absorb it a bit while the government pays on the large gap of the subsidy that also now came into play. So that has been the story of the subsidy that we had until, I mean, it became almost impracticable. Because what now happens is that the sector became so illiquid that we cannot pay for gas. And over 80% of our power generation in Nigeria is gas dependent. They're all thermal, you know, plants that use gas to heat up boil water, to steam, to drive their turbines and give us generate electricity. So gas, the Gencos were not able to pay gas suppliers. Gas suppliers were not able to supply gas further. That was one of the things that caused the almost near total crash of the grid since January. That's what led to the poor power supply that we experienced immediately after Christmas and New Year. Everything just went down. That is what, I mean, that was what, you know, was responsible for it. And those that are also familiar with the industry will also know that the minister also recently spoke about a debt of about 4.3 trillion naira, you know, to the gas suppliers and to the Gencos that needed to be paid. Well, he has promised to offset that debt this month. How he's going to raise the money? Well, that's the conversation that he needs to. But what I would love us to speak to is, you know, the argument that surrounds the present tariff review. But those are the backgrounds that leads us to that point where we say, if we don't do something today, we will continue, you know, we will continue to be in deeper depths, in deeper problem, and we'll be digging deeper hole for ourselves in the nearest future.
Indeed. And thank you very much for that bird's eye view of it. And at the top, when we were, you know, sort of chit-chatting, you had said that, yeah, you also had heard all sorts of stories indicating that people weren't knowledgeable about the intricacies of everybody just throwing a switch at home. Absolutely. And light coming on. Most people weren't. And you said that you had asked them, look, have you tried to find out if this is a local fault or a systemic fault? And people say, I don't know, I don't care, I'm not supposed to find out. You know, I just need light. Now, I'm recalling this because
to be fair,
you must have heard in the news that there's also the issue of our own habits as consumers. University College Ibadan, yes, the world-famous UCH, had its power cut because you are owing us almost $500 million naira in NEPA, you know, in electricity, in
bills, yes.
In electricity bills. $500 million. Now, that might also factor into this whole matter. How does an organization, private or corporate, end up owing the electricity company $500 million naira? No doubt that's also part of it. Now, let me tell you, because going back to that first point I made about you saying to some people that, have you tried to find out what kind of a fault you have? This notice was put out yesterday that I have here, and dear esteemed customer, purportedly coming from, let me see now, purportedly coming from, yep, that's it, Ikeja Electric PLC. And it reads, Dear esteemed customer, the current service disruption you are experiencing is as a result of significant load restrictions across many of our transmission load centers, particularly impacting, and then they list a whole series of places: Oworo, Maryland, Itire, Solo, Ogba, Alausa, Ejigbo, and we apologize for any inconvenience caused. We are actively collaborating with relevant stakeholders to restore normal operations. Signed, management. This goes back to the point that you made. Say, where is the problem coming from? Is it a local one or is it a systemic one? And so now that we have the situation that we are in now, okay, they've just put a screen up of prices, but I don't want that to distract me. I just wanted to say, what does this explain? That notice that I read out, what does this explain really as part of the problem that we're contending with?
All right. Okay, if you don't mind, right?
Yes.
I understand the question you are asking, but I believe there are also other foundations that we need to lay to this conversation.
Sure, please.
And it also speaks to the knowledge gap that we are talking about. For instance, I don't know where your house is, don't tell me, but do you know what band you are on?
That goes back to the band A business. That band A, band B.
Good. Now, a lot of consumers, and to be fair, let me state it up front, to be very fair, consumers don't have business knowing some things. But I believe there are a lot of things they need to know. They don't have business knowing that a fault happens somewhere or that the national grid collapsed. They don't have any business. What they have business with is to switch on and off their lights. That's what they have business with. Quite all right. Yes. But it is unfortunate that we're in this situation together, and